The first topic that you as a group said to us in signing up for this morning was developing and executing a compelling sales strategy. So the first question that I'm just going to start with is describe the process you've used to establish your sales strategy. And maybe Dave will continue with you on this.
Yeah, happy to do that. I think, and I thought it was described well, right? In sales, your client first. There's really no other way to be successful. So we really start with what is the experience that we're trying to create for our clients, which drives a value proposition they find is compelling, and they reward us with the assets that they bring. And so the start has to be, what is the experience that you want to take place each and every time one of your advisors is across the table from a client? And that's I think companies underinvest in that first step, and they sort of rush quickly to the process, but you need to drive real clarity for people around what does that interaction need to cover, what should it feel like, what should it look like, and what sorts of tools and things are we going to use to bring it to life. So I think that's the first thing to establish. After that, I'm fanatic about making sure the whole ecosystem is wired to support that. So by that I mean, if that's the experience you're trying to create, well then your sales leaders ought to be coaching to making sure that experience is occurring. Your compensation plan should be rewarding that behavior. Your reward and recognition programs better pull out your best advisors for the experience that you're trying to create. And what you talk about as leaders all the time needs to be in that same space. And so for me, it's about getting that ecosystem right. So define it well first, but then everything has to match, because if there's a disconnect, salespeople get thrown for a loop because they are naturally very intuitive. So if I stand up there for an hour and say, this is important, this is what we're going to do, but I compensate them on something else, it's wah, 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 and they go get the comp, right? And so I think it does really matter that the ecosystem is connected.
Yeah, terrific. And I think that notion of comp so critical, right? And making sure that's connected in the strategy.
Agree.
Yeah. Thank you. Tom?
We probably should have rehearsed beforehand, because my answer is identical. I really think that the only way to build a sales strategy is really to make sure you understand what your customer. And I don't want to repeat everything Dave said, but build on it. And what I would encourage everybody to think about is really be laser focused on the types of customers you have, because not all customers are the same. You will have different geographies, different verticals, and different life stages from a product perspective. So we try to look at it through those three lenses of the business. And then you have to clearly understand how you create value on the customer's terms for those various customers, and then build back from there. All of the elements that David mentioned, you have to be controlling and manage specifically. It's critical to work it back from the customer. So I think that's the starting point. And understanding the type of behaviors that you want to drive to create that value in the customer's terms, and again, lining everything up in the back to support those activities. So if you haven't spent the time up front to really understand where your customers are and what's the motivation for buying, and to me that's the fundamental thing. What's causing them to need to make a decision? Is it, in our case, because something broke? Their phone system broke, or their internet went down. Are their cost structures so high because of the technology that they're using that they see a cost savings benefit from making a transition? Or are they trying to create some efficiency to create a new revenue generating opportunity in their business? What are the triggers that are going to cause them to enter into that buying cycle, and making sure that you're there to be able to deliver against those triggers? So you have to not only know who the customer is, but understand what's causing them to want to get into that sales cycle.
That's great. Yeah. Some neat ideas. I'm going to move to another question, but I will open it up in a minute once we go through this one. So if there are some questions on strategy that you're thinking about, get ready, and Janelle and Varsha will be wandering around a little. Just signal them if you have a question. But let's first talk about this. So one unique idea with us around sales strategy execution that you feel has made a big impact. Tom?
At the end of the day, measurement, I think, is the key thing here. You have to really measure everything. And if you don't, it's really hard to understand whether the teams are being successful or not being successful. So, this to me is the holy grail for sales. It's accountability, but if you don't measure, you have no way to treasure the activities that are either working or not working, because fundamentally what worked for you yesterday will not work for you in the future, and unless you're measuring it, you don't know where things started and stopped. So to me, the one thing that I would encourage you to do is really make sure that you have a very strong, robust measurement process across that entire ecosystem that David was speaking of.
And a question on that, Tom, because what I've seen is, we've gone from hard to measure to way too much in some ways. Right. So how do you find that sweet spot of enough measurement but not, so much that it overwhelms?
It goes back to where I started. You need to really know the things that are important in driving value with the client, and then you need to measure those. So if you clearly articulate what it is that you want from a behavioral perspective, obviously we measure results, and those are trailing indicators. You need to identify what the leading indicators, the behavioral activities that are most likely going to generate results, and then measure those. To me, I've always focused on the activities in advance of the sales. What happens after the sale, after the behavior is predictable. If you really measure and are on top of your game, you can predict what the results are going to be. So I always try to measure the activities in advance, the leading indicators, the behavioral activities that we've defined are going to create success for our sales teams.
Great, thank you. One unique idea, Dave.
Yeah, I would echo that. I would just say getting to one version of the truth is important, right? I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting with your boss who's a numbers freak, and they start asking you about, well, tell me about that number, and by the time you look at your desk, it looks like you're in a cockpit, right? You got like 20 different reports, and you're trying to grab which one to figure out where they're going, and I think you waste a ton of time in coaching conversations. And so one is be clear about what metrics you need. The second is there can only be one version of the truth, and it can only be one page. Because otherwise you waste all your time talking about the numbers, which at the end of the day don't matter a hill of beans. It's all about what you're going to do with the numbers. But unless you can get to that one version of the truth very, very, very quickly, and people know how it lines up to the strategy, you just spin and spin and spin and spin. So last year in the full service brokerage business, we launched scorecards dashboards for the first time. And to rave reviews, not, right? They were not thrilled. But I think the intent was to change the caliber of the dialogue between sales leaders and advisors or salespeople, so that both were talking about things using the same language and both were looking at the same metrics. And the power of that in terms of the change of the caliber of coaching conversations and the caliber of how people think about the business has been night and day. So I would agree, it's measurement, but don't spin. Find whatever that is, use the one version, and unless something comes out of left field and knocks you sideways, don't change it during the year. It's a contract you have to make with your salespeople that says, we're going to do this every year. We're going to do it every year at the end of fiscal. We're going to put a peg in the ground around what's important, and barring something weird and wonderful, we're going to stay there for the whole year, because the certainty creates a whole bunch of good things out in the field.
That's great. Terrific. Yeah. I in my book, I talk about the shell game, right? The shell game of sales management, right? Where it's like, the salesperson's doing the dance and the manager, and it's, it's good dialogue, but it's confusing dialogue, right? Versus that one truth, right?
Yeah, I think if you can do it perfectly well, the numbers should be known by both parties before you get to the room, right? Because that there's no value in that dialogue. You both need to know it, but there's no value in spending your time together there, right? So I think the key is making sure both are prepped when they go in, they know what the numbers are, so you can spend all your time talking about the activities and behaviors to change the outcome.
Completely agree. Terrific.